And now the weather forecast for coastal waters of England and Wales until 1800. Pressure will remain high to the west, and a trough of low pressure will move south. Cloudy, 20 miles, 1019, falling slowly. And that's the end of the forecast for coastal waters of England and Wales. And it's also the end of broadcasting.
Let me tell you a story I heard that many of you also alluded to in the comments section of a recent video. The story goes that the Droitwich transmitting station just off the M5 in the West Midlands is used not only to transmit TalkSport, Radio 4 and Radio 5 Live, but also to gauge the impact of a nuclear attack on the UK via our nuclear submarines. Rumour has it that if the Today programme, that's been on the air since October 1957 on the BBC Home Service and then Radio 4, doesn't start at 6 AM, it is to be assumed that human life has been obliterated in the UK. The 198 kHz signal was apparently used as an indicator by submarine crews during the Cold War and beyond to determine whether the UK was under attack by nuclear weapons, meaning if the signal had gone off the air, Droitwich had been destroyed, and the Trident missiles would be launched from the submarines. This has allegedly been the case since the start of the Cold War. Some years ago, an article talked about what would happen if the UK's nuclear submarines lost contact with their command system. It alleged that the submarines would then listen for any news of what might have happened, and one of the indicators that something nasty had happened in the UK would be the absence of Radio 4 on longwave, and the Archers was given an example of something to listen for. Peter Hennessy also wrote in his book The Secret State that as one test, submarine crews should listen for the Today Show for a number of days, and then taking all other determining factors together, act accordingly. It's also been claimed that it was a standard procedure in the Royal Air Force during the 1970s on Vulcan bombers to do a radio set check by tuning into the Droitwich transmitter. The theory being that if you ever lost the signal after being dispatched to your target, you could assume that much of Birmingham and the West Midlands area had gone. So, breaking this down, as far as I'm aware, Peter Hennessy never gave a source of his claim, and I could find no reference to Vulcan crews monitoring the Radio 4 signal from Droitwich. So this raises a question, which is, if a nuclear submarine couldn't receive Radio 4, would they just go ahead and press the launch button? And the answer would be no. The signal from Droitwich wouldn't be the only deciding factor. Even on the surface, it wouldn't always be a given that a submarine would receive Radio 4. It depends on propagation in the main, but what if a submarine had a radio or antenna fault? What if Droitwich had the same problem? This brings me on to letters of last resort. The letters of last resort are 4 identically worded handwritten letters from the Prime Minister to the commanding officers of the 4 British ballistic missile submarines. They contain orders on what action to take if an enemy nuclear strike has destroyed the British government and has killed or otherwise incapacitated both the Prime Minister and their designated second-in-command. A new Prime Minister writes a set of letters immediately after taking office, which are then delivered to the submarines in sealed envelopes. In the event of the deaths of both the Prime Minister and the designated second-in-command as a result of nuclear strike, the commander of any of the nuclear submarines on patrol at that time would use a series of checks to determine whether the letters of last resort must be opened. The options have been reported differently by numerous media sources. The main set of options appears to be either 1. Retaliate with nuclear weapons, 2. Not retaliate, 3. For the submarine commander to use their own judgment, or 4. Place the submarine under an allied country's command, if possible. Australia and the United States are the countries that have been mentioned. The Guardian reported in 2016 that the options are said to include 1. Put yourself under the command of the United States if it's still there, 2. Go to Australia, 3. Retaliate, or 4. Use your own judgment. If the letters aren't used during the term of the Prime Minister who wrote them, they're destroyed unopened after the person leaves office, so that their content remains unknown to anyone except the issuer. In 1983, the procedure for Polaris-equipped Resolution-class submarines was to open the envelopes if there was an evident nuclear attack, or if all UK naval broadcast had ceased for 4 hours. Now let's look in simple terms how a submarine crew would know about a nuclear attack. A submarine can detect a nuclear attack through various means. They're equipped with advanced sonar systems that can detect underwater sounds, including the distinctive acoustic signature of a nuclear explosion. These systems can detect and analyse the sound waves generated by the explosion, allowing the submarine to determine the location and intensity of the attack. They also have sensitive seismic sensors that can detect vibrations caused by a nuclear explosion. These sensors can pick up the seismic waves generated by the blast, providing additional confirmation of a nuclear attack. They're equipped with radiation detectors that can sense the presence of radioactive particles in the water, and they also maintain constant communication with their command centres or other submarines through secure communication channels. Whilst infrastructure on the ground may have been destroyed, submarines as the last line of defence are part of a larger network of military intelligence and surveillance systems. They receive their information from various sources, including satellites and other submarines. Submarines use HF, VHF, UHF and satellites to transmit and receive signals, but VLF radio waves at 3 to 30 kHz can penetrate seawater to a few tens of meters, and a submarine in shallow depth can use them to communicate. VLF transmissions are relatively unaffected by atmospheric nuclear explosions. There are currently VLF transmitting stations across the UK, which could be used as a more reliable and secure point of transmissions for submarines to monitor. The first is Anthorn in Cumbria. The VLF transmitter here is used primarily for transmitting orders to submarines and transmits on 19.6 kHz with an output power of 550 kW. Its call sign is Golf Quebec Delta. Anthorn was once part of the link between the Fylingdales early warning radar in North Yorkshire and the United States air defence system. There's also Skelton in Cumbria, which is used to transmit encrypted orders to submarines, including the Trident nuclear fleet. It uses a 365-metre high-guide steel lattice mast, which is insulated against the ground and is the tallest structure in the UK. The transmitter went into service in 2001 and is the successor to the transmitter at the now closed Rugby radio station. There's DHFCS Crimond, a defence communication station which occupies the majority of the former RNAS Rattray. This is the home of another large transmitting station. And finally there's RNAS Inskip, otherwise known as HMS Nightjar, a former Fleet Air Arm airfield near the village of Inskip in Lancashire. The site today is still owned by the Royal Navy and is now home to DCSA Inskip, a tri-service communications centre. Most of the communications that happen there are low-frequency radio transmissions to submarines. In days gone by there was also Rugby, which I mentioned earlier, as well as the Criggion radio station, a transmitter site latterly operated by BT on behalf of the UK Ministry of Defence in Wales. It was established in World War II as a backup unit for Rugby radio station, operating on 19.6 kHz with the call sign Golf Bravo Zulu. The station was used until it shut down on the 1st of April 2003 for sending messages to submarines. So I think it's safe to say using Radio 4 from Droitwich is probably a fruitless exercise, considering signals that could be monitored for the same purpose can be sent from any of these places. Let's say that Droitwich was used as part of a wider nuclear attack monitoring system. This place would be extremely secure. You wouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. Anyone can hop the gates in the surrounding fields and walk up to the masts and buildings. There's no security guards, barbed wire, or high-tech cameras, and if this place was used for the purposes claimed, it would be a lot more secure. These days, as we've discussed, nuclear detection is much more advanced than whether someone can hear the Today programme on Radio 4. So that's my attempt to debunk what I think is an urban legend surrounding Droitwich, and the signal that apparently could have triggered all-out nuclear war.